Welcome to a world where discipline isn't just a virtue, it's the only thing separating you from being clubbed to death by your best friends. Today, we're marching into the brutal, bizarre, and frankly insane reality of daily life for a Roman legionary. These aren't just battlefield tactics. These are the 44 rules that governed every breath they took, turning ordinary men into the most terrifying fighting force the world had ever seen. Forget the glorious marble statues. This is the grit, the grime, and the sheer madness. 1. You think oversleeping and being late for work is bad? Try doing it in the Roman army. Missing morning roll call wasn't a matter of getting a verbal warning from your manager. It meant you were either left behind in hostile territory to fend for yourself, which was a death sentence, or your centurion just decided to expedite the process and have you executed on the spot for desertion. The Roman war machine was a finely tuned instrument of conquest, and it had absolutely no time for your personal excuses. The legion marched at dawn, with or without you. 2. Forget tactics and strategy for a moment. The real key to Roman victory was superstition. The most important rule when returning to camp after a long march? Always, and I mean always, enter through the gate left foot first. This wasn't a quirky tradition. It was a deadly serious regulation. The Roman word for left was sinister, and they believed stepping in with the right foot first would bring a terrible curse upon the entire legion. Imagine surviving a brutal battle against Celtic warriors, only to doom thousands of your comrades because you forgot your fancy footwork. 3. Collective punishment was Rome's favorite team-building exercise. If one soldier in your tent group of 8 men, your contubernium, stepped out of line, maybe he stole something or just had a bad attitude, the whole group paid the price, and the price was disgusting. For a week, your entire unit would have its wheat rations replaced with barley. To us, that sounds minor. To a Roman, it was the ultimate humiliation. Wheat was for soldiers, barley was for animals. It was a public declaration that your unit was behaving like livestock, and you were going to be fed accordingly. 4. Forget your modern energy drinks and electrolyte gels. The official sports drink of the Roman legion was a concoction called posca. It was a delightful mix of cheap, sour wine, basically vinegar, mixed with water and sometimes a few herbs. While it sounds absolutely vile, it was actually a stroke of genius. The vinegar acted as an antibacterial agent, killing nasty things in local water sources, and it was a surprisingly effective way to rehydrate and replace lost salts. So while it probably tasted like feet, it kept the legions marching and healthier than their enemies. 5. In the Roman army, you were expected to die, and they made sure the paperwork was handled with brutal efficiency. There were no lawyers or notaries on the front lines. A soldier's last will and testament had to be written down during a campaign, often just before a major battle. And where did you write it? You scratched it into the leather of your sword's scabbard or carved it onto the back of your shield. It was a grim, constant reminder of your mortality and the ultimate piece of multifunctional gear. It deflects swords, and it also ensures your cousin doesn't inherit your favorite goat. 6. Guard duty was the most boring and the most high-stakes job in the legion. If you were caught sleeping at your post, you weren't just yelled at. You were subjected to a punishment called the fustuarium. The soldier would be convicted by a tribunal, and then the rest of the men from his own cohort, his comrades, his friends, were required to beat him to death with clubs and stones. It was a terrifyingly personal form of execution, designed to ensure that every single soldier understood that one man's laziness could lead to the death of everyone in the camp. 7. Thinking of settling down and starting a family. Not on Rome's watch. For the entire 25-year term of service, legionaries were strictly forbidden from getting legally married. The logic was cold and simple. A wife and family were a distraction. Rome wanted your sole loyalty to be to your legion, your eagle standard, and your emperor. Of course, soldiers were still human. They formed unofficial relationships with local women and had children who were considered illegitimate until the day the soldier retired. For a quarter century, the legion was your only lawful family. 8. When you joined the Legion, you didn't just sign a contract, you were literally branded as state property. All new recruits received a military tattoo, known as a stigma. This wasn't a cool eagle on your bicep. It was an indelible mark, often the letters SPQR or the symbol of the Legion, tattooed on the hand where it was always visible. This served a very practical purpose. It made desertion almost impossible. A man with the mark of the Legion on his hand could be identified anywhere in the Empire, a walking, talking piece of government property. 9. You might think Roman generals were masters of strategy, but sometimes their entire battle plan depended on the lunch preferences of a bunch of chickens. Seriously, before a battle, the sacred chickens were brought out. If they ate the grain eagerly, it was a good omen. If they refused, it meant disaster. Before one major naval battle, the commander Publius Claudius Pulcher was told the chickens wouldn't eat. Annoyed, he grabbed the cage and chucked them into the sea, famously shouting, "If they won't eat, let them drink." He then proceeded to sail into one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman naval history. The lesson: never ever ignore the poultry. 10. In the modern world, a beard can be a sign of rugged manliness. In the Roman Legion, it was a sign that you were either a barbarian who needed to be conquered or a Greek philosopher who wouldn't shut up. A clean-shaven face was a non-negotiable part of the uniform. It was a mark of discipline, civilization, and Roman identity. It also had a practical purpose. A beard was something an enemy could grab in the brutal, close-quarters combat the legions excelled at. So every morning, you'd be scraping your face with a likely not-so-sharp bronze razor, all to maintain that clean-cut, civilized look while you were on your way to brutally subjugate another bearded tribe. 11. Your entire job as a legionary revolved around violence and theft on a state-sanctioned industrial scale. You were a professional plunderer. But if you dared to steal a wineskin or a loaf of bread from the man sleeping next to you in your tent, you were considered lower than the enemy you just slaughtered. Trust was the glue that held the Legion together. The man to your left and right was your lifeline, and breaking that bond was the ultimate crime. The punishment for theft within the ranks was swift and brutal, often execution. The enemy was just a job. Betraying a comrade was a mortal sin. 12. If you were a legionary stationed in the freezing, miserable forests of Germania or the damp winds of Britain, you might think a nice, warm pair of trousers would be a great idea. Well, you'd be wrong, dead wrong. To the Romans, trousers, or brachae as they called them, were the ultimate symbol of barbarism. They were for Gauls and other savages. A true Roman wore his tunic and endured the cold with his knees proudly exposed to the elements. It was a fashion statement of cultural superiority, even if it meant risking frostbite. For centuries, Rome would rather its soldiers freeze than have them look anything like the people they were conquering. 13. The Roman legionary was the most feared infantryman in the world for one simple reason: he could march anyone into the ground. A legionary's daily routine was a brutal, soul-crushing, forced march of around 20 miles, carrying over 60 pounds of gear, armor, weapons, shield, tools, and 2 massive wooden stakes for building camp defenses. They were nicknamed Marius's mules for a reason. If you started to slow down or complain, you wouldn't get sympathy. You'd get the immediate painful attention of your centurion and his vine staff, a thick stick he used for disciplinary encouragement. You learned to march until your feet bled, because the alternative was much, much worse. 14. The moment the battle horn sounded, your world shrank to the man in front of you and the men beside you. The strength of the Legion was its unbreakable formation, a wall of shields and death. If you panicked, if you dropped your shield and tried to run, you weren't just letting your friends down. You were committing suicide. The soldiers behind you in the ranks had explicit orders to kill any man who broke the line and fled. It created a terrifying psychological trap. In front of you was a screaming enemy horde, but behind you were your own comrades, ready to stab you in the back. Your only option for survival was to stand and fight. 15. The centurion was the absolute heart of the Legion. He was your commander, your trainer, and often your worst nightmare. He might be a brilliant leader, Or he might be a violent, drunken brute who got his position through sheer aggression. It didn't matter. You were required to address him with the utmost respect, using the title Domine, which means sir or even master. Talking back, questioning an order, or even looking at him the wrong way was an invitation to be beaten senseless with his signature vine staff. His authority was absolute, and your personal opinion of him was completely and painfully irrelevant. 16. Forget separation of church and state. In the Roman Empire, the emperor was the state, and he was also, for all practical purposes, a god. As a soldier, your loyalty oath wasn't just a pledge, it was a sacred religious act. You were required to participate in the imperial cult, offering sacrifices to the emperor's genius or divine spirit. Refusing to do so wasn't seen as having a different religious belief. It was seen as treason and mutiny. For the Roman high command, your worship was the ultimate proof of your loyalty. Atheism towards the emperor was a fast track to a cross. 17. Picture the scene. The battle is a chaotic mess of screaming and steel, and you've just cut down a wealthy-looking barbarian chieftain. He's wearing a solid gold torque around his neck, just sitting there. The urge to grab it is overwhelming, but if you bend down to snatch that loot before the battle is officially declared over, you're a dead man. Discipline was everything. A legion that broke formation to start plundering was a legion that was about to be wiped out by an enemy counterattack. Your centurion would likely kill you himself for endangering the entire unit over a shiny piece of metal. First, you win. Then, and only then, you get to play finders keepers with the spoils. 18. Night in a Roman marching camp was a place of paranoia and nervous tension. If you were returning from a patrol or just a late-night latrine visit, you'd be challenged by a sentry in the dark. Your life depended on knowing one single simple thing: the secret password. This password was changed daily for a reason. If you forgot it, stuttered, or gave the wrong one, you wouldn't get a second chance. The sentry's job was to kill any unidentified person on site, no questions asked. There was no "forgot my password" link to click. The only reset you'd be getting was a swift spear thrust from one of your own comrades. 19. If you thought being beaten to death by your friends for falling asleep was bad, the punishment for mutiny or treason was in a whole other league of horror. For these ultimate crimes, Rome reserved its most agonizing and humiliating form of execution: crucifixion. This wasn't just about killing you, it was about making a statement. You would be nailed to a cross and left to die slowly over days from exposure and asphyxiation, all while being displayed publicly as a warning to others. It was a soul-crushing spectacle of state power, designed to utterly terrify anyone who even dreamed of challenging the authority of the legion or the emperor. 20. An army marches on its feet, and the Romans took this more seriously than anyone. Your standard-issue footwear, the heavy hobnailed sandals known as caligae, were your most important piece of equipment. You were expected to keep them in perfect condition. No excuses. A surprise gear inspection that found your sandals worn out or poorly maintained would result in a flogging. Why? Because a broken sandal on a 20-mile march leads to blisters. Blisters in a pre-antibiotic world could lead to a life-threatening infection. A soldier who couldn't march was a liability, and the legion had no tolerance for liabilities. Your feet were state property, and you'd better maintain them. 21. The Roman chain of command was brutally simple, and it was carved into the very wood of the centurion's vine staff. You did not question orders, you did not offer your opinion, and you absolutely never, ever talked back. Voicing dissent or arguing with a centurion was the fastest way to get an impromptu dental adjustment, courtesy of his favorite tool of discipline. The beating would be immediate, public, and painful. This system wasn't designed to foster creative thinking. It was designed to create instant, unquestioning obedience in the heat of battle. You learned very quickly that the only correct answer to any order was a silent, swift action. 22. So you've signed up for 25 years of grueling service to the greatest empire in the world. You must get paid well, right? Not exactly. First off, your salary was meager. Second, You had to pay for almost everything yourself from that salary. The state issued your basic gear, but you had deductions for food, for replacement boots, for your tent, and even for your own burial fund. That's right, you had to pay into a burial club to ensure you'd get a proper funeral if you died. You were risking your life for Rome, and they were docking your pay to cover the expenses of them getting you killed. 23. The Roman legion was a deeply religious and superstitious organization. Every major action, from marching out of camp to starting a battle, was preceded by a sacrifice to the gods. As a soldier, your attendance and participation were mandatory. It didn't matter if you were a Celt, a Gaul, or a Syrian who worshipped entirely different deities. You had to stand there, look respectful, and take part in the pagan rituals, which often involved the slaughter of animals and the inspection of their entrails. The smell alone was probably nauseating, but refusing to participate was seen as disrespecting the gods who protected the legion, making it a punishable offense. 24. In most armies, an act of individual heroism is rewarded with a medal. In the Roman legion, it could get you executed. The strength of the legion was never the individual soldier. It was the unbreakable cohesion of the formation. If you, in a fit of bravery, decided to charge out of the line to take on an enemy champion, you were committing a crime. By breaking formation, you created a gap, a moment of weakness that could compromise the entire line and get hundreds of your comrades killed. This unsanctioned heroism was seen as a selfish act of vanity, and it was often punished with the same severity as cowardice. Rome didn't need heroes, it needed disciplined cogs in its war machine. 25. The Roman legion was a master of the surprise attack, and that required absolute silence on night marches. And when they said absolute silence, they meant it. A cough could get you a harsh glare, a sneeze could earn you a beating. But an inopportune fart? That could get you flogged. It sounds ridiculous, but a sudden noise could betray the position of thousands of men to a nearby enemy patrol, ruining a planned ambush and getting everyone killed. The Roman military command was the ultimate micromanager. It controlled what you ate, when you slept, and yes, it held you personally responsible for your own digestive system's lack of discipline. 26. Forget about privacy. Any letters you wrote home to your family or a loved one were considered fair game for your officers to read. This wasn't just about satisfying some centurion's boring afternoon. It was a matter of state security and morale control. An officer could learn a lot from a soldier's mail. Is morale dangerously low? Is there talk of mutiny brewing? Is this soldier accidentally leaking sensitive information about troop movements? Your personal feelings and private thoughts were just another potential source of intelligence for the Roman war machine. Nothing was truly your own. 27. You couldn't just grow your hair however you wanted. Every soldier was required to maintain the same, practical, no-nonsense haircut. Short on the back and sides, with the top combed forward in what we might recognize as a Caesar cut. This wasn't a fashion choice, it was a regulation with multiple purposes. It was hygienic, reducing the risk of lice in crowded barracks. It was practical, as long hair could be grabbed by an enemy in a fight. Most importantly, it was a uniform. It stripped away individual vanity and reinforced the collective identity of the legion, turning 1,000 different men into one unified, intimidating image. 28. In the Roman legion, you didn't own your body, you were merely borrowing it from the state. Therefore, hiding an injury was considered a serious crime. If you got a nasty cut, twisted an ankle, or felt a fever coming on and tried to tough it out, you were in deep trouble. Why? Because a small, untreated wound could lead to a major infection, rendering a soldier useless. By hiding your injury, you were depriving the legion of a functional warrior, which was treated as a form of desertion. You owed Rome your fighting fitness, and you would be punished for trying to conceal any damage to their property, which was you. 29. Get ready for the least fair management policy in history. If one man in your 8-man tent group, your contubernium, did something stupid, everyone paid the price. Did Gaius lose a piece of his gear? Everyone gets flogged. Did Marcus fall asleep on watch? Everyone gets put on latrine duty for a week. This wasn't about justice, it was about efficiency. The centurions knew that the fastest way to enforce discipline was to turn every soldier into a watchdog for his comrades. The constant threat of group punishment ensured that the soldiers policed themselves with a level of brutal vigilance that no officer could ever hope to achieve alone. 30. A retreat is the most dangerous moment in any battle. It's when order breaks down and soldiers get slaughtered. The Romans had a solution for this, and it was terrifying. When the order was given for a tactical withdrawal, you did not turn your back and run. That was the definition of cowardice. Instead, you were trained to walk backward, slowly and deliberately, keeping your shield locked with your comrades and your eyes fixed on the advancing enemy. It was a maneuver that required unimaginable courage and discipline, effectively moonwalking away from a tidal wave of death, ready to halt and fight at any second. 31. The rule forbidding soldiers from marrying for 25 years had a very direct and personal consequence for their families. Any children you had with a local woman during your service were legally considered illegitimate. They were bastards. This meant they had no legal right to inherit your property or, most importantly, claim Roman citizenship through you. This was not fully resolved until the day you retired. Upon receiving your honorable discharge, you were finally granted the right to marry your partner, and only then would your children, who might be adults by this point, be retroactively legitimized. It was a bizarre 25-year-long legal limbo for your entire family. 32. A soldier's belt, or cingulum, was far more than just a piece of leather to hold up his tunic. It was his badge of honor, the unmistakable symbol of his status as a legionary. The decorative metal plates and dangling straps were a soldier's pride. To lose this belt, either in battle or through carelessness, was the ultimate disgrace. The punishment was designed to inflict maximum humiliation. You would be stripped of your military status and forced to stand in the middle of the camp for hours, beltless and shamed, enduring the scorn and mockery of every soldier who walked by. It was a powerful reminder that you were nothing without the legion. 33. The Roman army was the most diverse institution of the ancient world, a massive melting pot of men from every corner of the empire. You'd have a Gaul standing next to a Syrian, serving with an Iberian and a Thracian. This incredible diversity was a huge strength, but it was also a potential powder keg. Therefore, mocking a fellow soldier's homeland or his accent was an incredibly stupid thing to do. It wasn't officially against the rules, but it was a fast track to getting a severe, unofficial beating from the man you insulted and all his friends. Unit cohesion was everything, and starting an internal feud was a threat to everyone's survival. You learned to respect your comrades, or you learned it the hard way. 34. Imagine you're a goat herder from the hills of Syria who has never spoken a word of Latin in your life. Congratulations, you're now in the Roman Legion, and you have about a week to become fluent in military commands or face constant beatings. There was no Duolingo for legionaries. The army operated on one language only, Latin. Every order from form testudo to charge had to be understood instantly. A moment's hesitation because of a language barrier could shatter a formation and lead to a massacre. Your centurion wasn't a patient teacher. His vine staff was his primary teaching tool. It was the most brutal and effective language immersion program in history. 35. There was no such thing as a relaxed morning in a Roman camp. At any moment, the centurions could call for a surprise gear inspection, and it was the most stressful pop quiz imaginable. They would meticulously check every piece of your equipment, the sharpness of your gladius, the rivets on your armor, the straps on your shield, the hobnails on your sandals. Any flaw, any rust spot, any sign of neglect would result in you being publicly shamed, fined a chunk of your salary, and likely given a painful flogging for good measure. Rome knew that battles were won or lost based on the reliability of equipment, and your dignity was a small price to pay for that. 36. As if carrying 60 pounds of armor, weapons, and personal gear wasn't miserable enough, every single legionary on the march also had to carry 2 giant, sharpened wooden stakes. These weren't small tent pegs, they were thick, heavy poles called sudes, and they were an absolute nightmare to lug around for 20 miles a day. But at the end of that miserable march, their genius became clear. Using these stakes, the entire legion could construct a massive fortified wall around their camp in a matter of hours, complete with a ditch. It meant that no matter how deep in enemy territory they were, every night they slept inside a custom-built fortress. 37. Before the first sword was even drawn, the Roman legion engaged in psychological warfare, and their primary weapon was sound. As thousands of soldiers advanced in perfect unison, they would begin to stamp their hobnailed sandals on the ground in a synchronized, terrifying rhythm. The sound was like a single, giant monster approaching, a thunderous heartbeat of disciplined death that echoed across the battlefield. For a disorganized tribal army used to chaotic charges, this display of inhuman unity and coordination was utterly demoralizing. It was a performance designed to break their spirit and make them question if they were even fighting against men at all. 38. Forget any romantic notions of Roman banquets. The fuel for the Roman war machine was mind-numbingly monotonous. Wheat. Day in and day out, your primary meal was a bland, joyless wheat gruel or a rock-hard biscuit called buccellatum. This wasn't food, it was fuel, designed for maximum energy output and logistical efficiency. And what happened if you complained about the culinary boredom? Nothing good. Complaining was a form of insubordination. It showed a lack of toughness and discipline. Your centurion would be happy to give you something to really complain about, and his vine staff was always ready to provide that painful perspective. 39. While soldiers off duty were known to enjoy their sour wine, being drunk on duty was a one-way ticket to the afterlife. The security of an entire legion, thousands of men, rested on the alertness of its sentries. A single guard who was drunk or asleep at his post could allow an enemy to infiltrate the camp and start a massacre. The punishment for this failure had to be absolute to ensure it never happened. There were no second chances, no disciplinary hearings. A soldier found drunk on watch would be summarily executed, often on the spot. Your personal desire to get buzzed was nothing compared to the collective security of the legion. 40. Cowardice in battle was the most unforgivable sin a soldier could commit, and it was symbolized by one single, shameful act: dropping your shield and running. The large Roman shield, the scutum, wasn't just for your protection. Its wide edge protected the man standing to your left. The soldiers formed an interlocking wall of shields. If you dropped yours, you weren't just saving yourself. You were creating a fatal gap in the line, sentencing your comrades to death. The famous phrase was, "Return with your shield or on it." Any legionary who threw down his shield and fled, if he survived the battle, would be hunted down and executed by his own side for his betrayal. 41. At the end of a grueling 20-mile march, your work was far from over. Before you could even think about eating your bland wheat gruel, you had to grab your entrenching tool. Every single night, the Legion built a new fortified camp from scratch, and that included digging a massive latrine trench. And this wasn't just a random hole in the ground. It had to be dug to exact military specifications: a certain width, a certain depth, and a certain distance from the camp walls. It was a massive, stinking, unglamorous engineering project that had to be completed every single day. The Roman Empire was built on roads, aqueducts, and meticulously dug toilet trenches. 42. In the Roman army, familiarity breeds contempt, and contempt gets you killed. Your officers were not your friends. They were your superiors, and the chasm between ranks was absolute and unbridgeable. You would never, under any circumstances, address a centurion, legate, or any other officer by his first name. That level of informality would be seen as a staggering act of disrespect. You use their proper titles: centurion, legate, domini, and nothing else. A slip of the tongue could earn you a public beating, a painful lesson in military etiquette that you would not soon forget. They weren't your buddies, they were the men who held the power of life and death over you. 43. After a successful and bloody battle, the battlefield would be littered with the spoils of war: weapons, armor, jewelry, coins. As a soldier, you might feel you've earned a little bonus, but you were forbidden from pocketing anything for yourself. All plunder, every last sword and earring, had to be collected and handed over to the commander. He would then, in theory, distribute it fairly among the men, but a huge portion always went to the officers and the state treasury. This rule wasn't just about fairness. It was about preventing fights and maintaining discipline. It also ensured the generals got rich, while the men who did the actual fighting got whatever scraps were left over. 44. Did you dream of a quiet posting in the sunny hills of Tuscany? Or maybe a cushy garrison job in Egypt with great food? Too bad. In the Roman legion, you had absolutely no say in where you were stationed. You were a piece on a global chessboard, and you went wherever Rome told you to go. More often than not, that meant being sent to the most miserable, dangerous, and god-forsaken frontiers of the empire. The cold, damp forests of Germania, the windswept plains of Dacia, or the rebellious deserts of Judea. You didn't choose your post. You were sent where Rome needed bodies to die for the glory of the empire. So there you have it. A life of brutal discipline, bizarre superstitions, and the constant looming threat of being beaten to death by your friends for snoring too loudly. The Roman legion wasn't just an army. It was a human meat grinder that forged the greatest empire the world has ever known. It makes you wonder how many of us could have survived it. Which of these insane rules do you think is the absolute dumbest or the most surprisingly brilliant? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this march through history's most brutal rulebook, make sure to slaughter that like button and subscribe for more.